Hey, it's Sam from Sugar Spun Run, and today we are making a confetti crumb cake. Today's recipe is a fun twist on classic coffee cake. This would be great for serving for a birthday breakfast, but it's really just fun to make any time of year, and you can customize the sprinkles to match any holiday, which would make it a good festive dish. Red and green sprinkles for a Christmas crumb cake, the opportunities are endless. This one's a lot of fun, comes together pretty quickly, so let's get started by preheating our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so one thing that really sets this recipe apart, makes it really fun and so good, is we are going to be making cake batter crumbs. I shared this recipe previously. It originated from Milk Bar actually, and I ultimately had to make my own version because it's one of my favorite things in the world to eat. It's like a cake batter streusel. So to make it, you will need a half cup of softened unsalted butter. We'll drop this in a mixing bowl. We're going to add a cup of granulated sugar and 3 tablespoons of firmly packed light brown sugar. All right, next grab yourself an electric mixer, which that was gonna pop out of there. And we're going to cream these ingredients together until they're light and fluffy. All right, next we'll stir in 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, which is going to give this a nice vanilla cake batter flavor. All right, now set this aside. And in a separate bowl, you're going to want to measure out 2 cups of cake flour. So I like using cake flour in this recipe for this topping and ripple, and I also use it for the actual crumb cake. I will include notes in the recipe if you don't have cake flour, if you only have all-purpose flour, but for a nice light tender crumb and just for best results, I really do recommend cake flour. So this is 2 cups, and we're going to add a 4th teaspoon of baking powder. And what the baking powder does is it keeps the streusel or the crumb from being too dense. When it bakes, it could just become too firm and difficult to bite into. The baking powder is going to make it a little more porous and just make the whole eating experience more enjoyable. We're also going to add a heaping 1/8 teaspoon of table salt. Let's stir these ingredients together to get them a little bit distributed. Right, now grab your butter mixture, and we're going to work this cake flour mixture into our butter mixture, and we're going to be aiming for like a clumpy, streusel-y mixture. So this can be done by hand, but it's a little bit of work. So I'm going to use my mixer, but if you use your mixer, I just want to note that you want to be very careful about not overdoing it. So mix until just barely or just almost combined. Got that, we'll add the rest. If you overdo it, you're going to end up with a paste, and you want a clumpy crumble mixture. All right, so we have a really dry mixture here. I have some clumps that have formed. I don't want to go any further than this because I don't want to overdo it. So at this point, I'm going to add my sprinkles. We're using 1/4 cup of sprinkles. I'll add these in. These are actually food dye free sprinkles because my kids definitely do eat some food dye, but we try to minimize it, and they love this cake. So I'm using sprinkles without dye in them. And I'll link to them because I know some of you prefer that as well. Now, once I add the sprinkles, I'm not going to use the mixer anymore. I'm going to use my hands, and I'm just going to work the sprinkles in. And as I'm doing this, I'm sort of pinching the dough together, which is going to form some clumps, which is the best part. I don't want any pockets of dry mix on the bottom, so I'm just making sure there's no flour hiding there. So now we have our cake batter crumb layer and topping. So we'll set this aside and let's make our actual crumb cake batter. For the crumb cake base, grab yourself a large mixing bowl, and to this, we're going to add 8 ounces of softened cream cheese. I do recommend a full fat cream cheese, not the kind sold in tubs. If I can get it out of the wrapper. We're also going to be using 1/2 cup of softened unsalted butter. We're also going to be adding 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. And today's recipe could be made using a stand mixer, but today I'm going to be using my electric hand mixer. And we'll cream all of these ingredients together until they're light and creamy and well combined. You don't want to see any lumps remaining. The cream cheese in this recipe is like my secret weapon. It makes the crumb nice and moist. It adds a nice depth of flavor. So does the buttermilk, which we'll be getting to in a bit, but it really makes for a next level crumb cake. All right, that looks pretty good. So next we're going to add our eggs. You'll need 2 large eggs for this recipe. Your eggs should be at room temperature. Using all room temperature ingredients is important because it helps make sure that all of your ingredients are going to combine nicely and you have a nice uniform batter. Right, let's bring this back. We'll add our eggs, and we're also going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and then we'll stir everything until it's well combined. All right, it's a good idea to use a spatula to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl just to make sure everything's nicely combined. We have a couple of lumps here, so I'll give it another quick mix. All right, for your dry ingredients, grab a separate mixing bowl. And to this, we're going to add 3 cups of cake flour. Again, I really do like using cake flour for this recipe. We'll also be adding 2 teaspoons of baking powder and a ½ teaspoon of salt. We're just using table salt today. Whisk everything together. All right, and before we start adding our flour mixture to our buttercream cheese mixture, you're also going to want to measure out a ½ cup of buttermilk. This is the one ingredient where you have a little bit of wiggle room. Sometimes I forget to pull my buttermilk out when I pull the butter and cream cheese out. So if all of your other ingredients are room temperature, you can get away with your buttermilk being a little bit cold. So I alternate adding the flour mixture and the buttermilk mixture. So I start with the flour and I'll add like 1/3 of the flour mixture. I'll mix this in on low speed until it's just combined. Then I'll add about half the buttermilk. Another 1/3 of the flour mixture. Then the rest of the buttermilk, and then I'll do the rest of the flour mixture. So I'm doing the flour in like 3 parts and the buttermilk in 2, and I prefer this method of alternating just because I feel like everything just combines a little bit more nicely. You get a smoother batter this way, and you're also less likely to overdo it with the mixing. This looks pretty good. I'm going to use my spatula again, scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl. I know I still have some flour that needs to be worked in. I'm just going to finish everything with my spatula. All right, today's recipe, we are cooking in a 13×9 baking dish. I'm using a metal one. If you use a glass one, that's fine. Just note you're going to need a little bit more time in the oven. So I've sprayed this with baking spray. Alternatively, you can lightly grease and flour it, which is just going to make it easy for you to easily lift the slices out of there. I always serve this in the pan I make it in. You really want to because the crumbles on top, you can't flip it out. But it's still nice to grease it a little bit, that way your slices come out easily. All right, so we're going to take a little less than half of this mixture, and it is a pretty stiff batter, and I'm going to spread this over the bottom of the pan. Looks like I'm going to need more than that. All right, now let's grab our cake crumb mixture, and we're going to add half of this, or sprinkle half of this evenly over our crumb batter. This is going to give us a nice colorful ripple. After I've added it, I just sort of gently press it into the batter. Just going to make the next part a little easier for me if I do that. All right, so for the rest of our batter, we're going to spread this over that crumb center, but it can be a little tricky to do because it's a stiff batter, so I like to sort of dollop the batter over the crumbs. Just trying to make this next step as easy for me as possible. And then I'm going to use an offset spatula to gently nudge this batter over the whole cake. And if you notice some of those crumbs getting swirled up into the rest of your batter, it's not really a big deal. And a little bit of that happening is kind of unavoidable. But I found this is the easiest way to get that batter distributed. All right, grab the rest of your cake crumbs and sprinkle those over the top of your crumb cake. It smells so good, and it's not even baking yet. All right, let's take this over to our 350 Fahrenheit preheated oven. You'll bake it in the center rack, and I find it typically takes about 45 to 50 minutes to bake. You are going to want to test it by using a toothpick inserted in the center. You want to see a clean toothpick come out or moist crumbs. Now this is a dense cake, so when you check that toothpick, I want you to look at it carefully and make sure you don't have a very thin layer of batter on it. Sometimes that can be mistaken for a clean toothpick, but usually there's a thin layer of glossy batter. That's a sign it needs to stay in the oven longer. This looks great, so I'm going to let it cool in the pan for about 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer before I go any further with this recipe. Now this cake can be served exactly as is, or if you want to be a little bit extra, if there's not enough sugar in it for you already, you can make my very simple vanilla glaze and just drizzle this over top the crumb cake. Adds a nice little contrast to it. It's not necessary, but it does taste really good with a crumb cake. All right, let's go ahead and dig in and take a look at this cake. I never know where to make my first cut. It smells so good. Go for this middle piece here. And there you have it. We've got a super, super plush crumb. This is so moist, so full of flavor, and we've got that beautiful cake batter or crumble ripple in the middle. I really think you're going to love this one. If you try it, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. I always do love hearing from you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. All right, I'm going for the big piece of streusel. Oh no! That won't do. I'm glad I went back for it. Oh my gosh. This is so good.